Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Tahil Sharma. My pronouns are he and they, and I am the Faith Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force. And I'm very excited to welcome you all to Empower Hour. This is a new series that has been started by the National LGBTQ Task Force to create a centering conversation on how we navigate discourse around faith and spirituality and how it impacts the work of queer and trans people in our communities. It's very important to think about how there are different ways that people have a relationship with faith and spirituality. It is often traumatic, it is often painful, but it is also for many redeeming and a part of their daily life. We want to make this a space where people can talk about those candid relationships to faith and spirituality while living unapologetically as being an LGBTQ person. Um, Today's episode, or today's conversation, I should say, is one that I've been really looking forward to because it personally applies to some of the experiences that I can relate to. But it also is connected to a lot of different communities who you're going to get to hear from today. And I'm very excited to be able to share that one of the folks that has been able to help me explore that conversation a little bit is Aruna Rao, who's the executive director of Desi Rainbow, an organization that was conceived in 2017 for South Asian families and friends of LGBTQ folks and those who are questioning individuals to learn about the issues of the community, to find community with one another and learn how to better support loved ones, especially as allies. Aruna ji has a special story that she may be able to share on how Desi Rainbow was started. But we're happy to partner with them for today's Empower Hour, especially as we bring in fellow speakers Tushar Bhagat and Mathoda. We're happy to be able to center the voice of South Asian, aka Desi folks. For those of you that aren't aware of the word Desi, Desi typically encompasses a set of countries in South Asia that include India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Maldives. Sometimes it can also include Afghanistan, but it depends on who you might be talking to. But we're talking about a large number of countries with a lot of religious communities, a lot of ethnic backgrounds, a lot of cultural traditions, and a lot of languages. So to call us by a single term may be sort of a summation that doesn't do it justice, but it is an opportunity for us to sort of talk about it from a lens of some shared experiences. So you may hear folks go between Desi and South Asian as a part of a reference to a larger collective of folks. And I'm really excited to be able to have Arunaji, Ray, and Tushar here to be able to speak. I think it's an opportunity to learn from different religious backgrounds, to hear about the work of Desi Rainbow, and for folks to be able to see what are the different ways that people hold the relationship or the tensions that may occur when it comes to practicing a specific tradition or understanding things from a specific belief system and still identifying as LGBTQ. So without further ado, Arunaji, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tahil, for inviting me, for inviting Tushar and Ray here today. It's a real honor to be speaking to the LGBTQ Task Force community and to kind of bring a little bit about our own experiences as Desi folks in the diaspora and how we are trying to make sense of what's happening with issues relating to LGBTQ rights, with spirituality, and like where we all fit in into this. I'm going to just briefly introduce myself, introduce Desi Rainbow, and then talk a little bit about my own lived experience. And both Ray and Tushar have some pretty extraordinary stories to share as well and insights to share. So to begin with, so my name is Aruna. My pronouns are she and her. I am a parent of a queer and trans child, and that's how I came to this work. So when I was engaged in mental health advocacy more than a decade ago, and when my own child came out, I found myself struggling to find resources for myself, to understand how to support myself, how to support my child. And there was no easily accessible source of information of support that felt right, that felt like it was a good fit for me, and that kind of held me with some grace, with some compassion. And so that was the initial point where this Rainbow kind of came into existence. So this work has been going on for almost a decade now. Desi Rainbow has been in existence as an institution for about 5 years. But the process has gone far beyond me and my lived experience and my personal story to encompass a range of South Asian folks across the country, many in Canada as well, so really across North America, who all come together because we need something that resonates culturally, that resonates in a way that makes us feel like we are seen, we are heard, we are all part of the same experience. So Desi Rainbow's mission is to create a world where people of all genders, all sexualities are affirmed, are celebrated, and we provide support, education, and advocacy to further this idea, this vision of what we want our community to look like. I'm going to focus a little bit more on what we've done in the past couple of years as it relates to the faith experience, the faith communities. And as Tahil pointed out, we have a huge diversity of faith experiences that come from the South Asian subcontinent. And even if we wanted to, I don't think we could address everything, but we try to address what the experience of many people in the diaspora are. The main issue is that, of course, the largest part of the South Asian diaspora, the Desi diaspora in the United States now, is Hindu and Indian. But Desi Rainbow has always understood that it's not enough to just focus on the majority of people in this community. We have to serve all people across every part of the faith spectrum, the religious spectrum, the nationality spectrum in this country. So we actually have been we've been hosting conversations similar to perhaps this one, but really sort of focused on bringing in the South Asian audience. So when we started off during the pandemic, when everybody was looking for community, right, and we were all stuck on Zoom and trying to figure out how to build community, we hosted a series of really beautiful conversations that focused on basically, I remember we addressed Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism, and Christianity. These are some of the faiths with perhaps the largest set of adherents in this country. And we had these very intimate, beautiful conversations. Tushar was actually part of some of them, where we talked about what it meant to be an LGBTQ person, where it left you in relationship to your faith community, what kind of acceptance you found, and what kind of rejection you might have experienced. So these conversations continue to this day. We keep talking about these issues, and we are really we're very dedicated to the idea that we want to create a space where all LGBTQ folks are welcomed into every faith community. So a little bit about some of the things that we've done. Some of these, by the way, we didn't record a lot of the early conversations, but some of them have been recorded and are on our YouTube channel, including, I believe, a beautiful conversation with Tushar. And there was a, Tushar, if maybe you can actually put it in chat. There was a Buddhist monk from India who joined this conversation. And it was really an amazing conversation that we had. But we've had similar conversations across the faith spectrum. Let's see. One thing we are very clear about is that regardless of your faith background, the extent that you have access to mainstream community spaces, to mandirs, masjids, gurdwaras, churches, mosques, satsangs, it's usually limited by your gender expression and your sexuality. Most people fear being out in faith spaces because they fear rejection. Sometimes cis people can usually pass, but certainly gender diverse people can face hostility or even violence in many of these faith spaces. And of course, there is always the specter of conversion therapy, which was recently in the news, as all of you know. Many of our people in our community have been subjected to conversion therapy. And it is a really devastating thing, and we really want to make sure that we don't allow this to continue. Let's see. So Dahlia had asked us to talk a little bit about like our own lived experience and how it has brought us to this space and to this kind of work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own lived experience and, how I have found inspiration or, focus within my religious background. So I grew up in a family where my mother was an observant Hindu. My father was largely agnostic. Like many people of my generation, I went to schools run by Catholic and Protestant missionaries. And I had friends who were, across the spectrum of religious experience, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh. I think I continue to identify as Hindu because it offers me a bigger tent where many of my spiritual needs are fulfilled. There are obviously, as I have, grown and sort of matured as a person, there are parts of the tradition that are really difficult for me to understand and comprehend. Some of the things that I have struggled with are the way that like caste is a specter in Hinduism that brings so much grief, anguish, and violence. Misogyny, which is something that I have experienced in Hindu practice. And it has been very difficult to handle for me personally. But what keeps me within the Hindu tradition, the broader Hindu tradition, is really what I consider a personal relationship with divinity. And I think this is very common experience for many Hindus. There's a pantheon of divinity where all aspects of the human experience are given expression, where alignment of body, mind, and spirit through worship, through puja, through meditation, through yoga, are all possible. So, and it started when I was a child, of course, this conversations with the divine, but it continues to be something that I still lean on. And here I want to mention, one of my personal deities, my Ishtadevtas, that I'm super fond of and that I, still have conversations with is Krishna, who, if not the queerest of gods, is among the queerest of gods. And I feel like a very deep, strong connection to this deity. And there are other deities that I've had, really beautiful, I feel like a really personal connection with. Devi, the goddess, for comfort and for strength. Ganesha for blessings. Shiva for focus and clarity. But all of these things essentially have kept me with Hinduism as my primary mode of spiritual connection. So I think one of the things that many progressive Hindus like myself deal with is to look at the history of Hindu practice, reject what essentially creates dissonance, and look at what's life affirming, what's beautiful, what's inclusive, and to make sure that we reject and discard or reinvent practices that don't serve us or our communities. Coming to the issue of LGBTQ identity in Hinduism. So there is no central authority in Hindu scripture or text or practice that tells me that being queer or trans is forbidden or is wrong. In fact, there are actually ancient texts that lay out categories of identities, male, female, and Tritiya Prakriti, which is the third gender, which essentially, much before the West even talked about LGBTQ identities and created this alphabet soup of identities, there were texts essentially that laid out, all of these identities and put them into this third gender category. And this was thousands of years before the West got around to it. And of course, again, acknowledging that within Hinduism, there are diverse traditions and all of them can have different views and practices. If you look at mythology, and I did look at mythology when my kid came out and I was trying to figure out, I had never really kind of, thought about these issues before as being a cishet person who never had to before. If you look at the epics in mythology and in regional language stories, there's so many instances of protagonists who are gender fluid, who have same-sex relationships. And of course, in South Asia, there is a thriving, living tradition of Kinnar or Hijra folks, who both have a role in ritual and are highly visible as gender diverse communities. That said, I feel like the Indian auntie who, like, is always saying, okay, look, back then everything was so great. But what we're living with is the reality that in spite of all this rich cultural and religious history, acceptance of queer and trans people right now in the diaspora, in our countries of origin, is really low. Just last month, the Indian government passed a bill which essentially denies self identification for the vast majority of trans people. Same sex marriage has not been legalized in India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. Homosexuality was only legalized recently in 2018 after almost 200 years of criminalization. Some of this, of course, has to do with colonization of the subcontinent. When the British essentially found that, were appalled, I guess, at the diversity of sexuality and gender and decided to criminalize all of these expressions. And so those laws remained in the book and have created like a culture that is really at this point antagonistic to LGBTQ identity. It's really interesting here to see that Nepal, which is the only country in South Asia that I think has never been colonized, is the first country to have legalized same sex marriage. So there is a lot of this kind of interplay of colonization and how people's attitudes have developed. And lastly, to give you some of my personal observations about what within the Hindu tradition inspires me, gives me solace and joy. It's essentially the thread of destruction, mysticism, and striving for social justice that comes from what's called the Bhakti movement. This was a several century long spiritual revolution, I think from the 7th to the 17th century, which really essentially popularized what I had been discussing before, which is a profound personal relationship to God. And that essentially rejects caste and gender hierarchies, as well as the formal rituals and the use of local language, and emphasizes the use of local language over Sanskrit. And there's so many inspiring figures from the Bhakti movement who have transcended barriers of caste and gender, who have shown that it's possible to take an ossified hierarchical tradition and make it accessible to everybody. And of the few here that I will point out is Akka Mahadevi. She was a 12th century Kannada mystic from the south of India. She renounced her life of privilege as a young woman, left her husband and family to become an ascetic who essentially wandered naked through the world, and wrote hundreds of vachanas, which are prose poems, dedicated to Shiva, who was her personal deity that she had this relationship, deep and profound relationship with. And then, of course, many people know Mirabai, who was a 16th century Rajput princess who was essentially a devotee of Krishna. And she, again, transcended so many barriers to essentially create like a thriving system that continues to this day of people feeling this personal connection with God. There are hundreds of stories like that. And so I won't really spend too much time on it, but I just want to say that these are the kinds of things that keep someone like me engaged in Hindu tradition. And in turn, this kind of brings me to my work, because the work really is about like encompassing all identities, encompassing like all people into this kind of cohesive whole where we all belong together and work together towards our shared goal. So I'm going to end there and let other folks talk.
Thank you so much, Aruna ji, and thank you for, I think, giving people a sense of oftentimes what I feel tends to be maybe a more limited scope or understanding of Hinduism. I think oftentimes when people perceive what Hinduism is, it can often come from a lens of just being polytheistic, just being ritualistic, just being idol worship. And that the many strains of beliefs are just as complex and accepted within the diaspora, that it's also very important for people to know how beliefs that we see as progressive today actually do have roots and traditions that also accepted those things, going back centuries, but that maybe did not have the same language that we would use today. And I think it's really important to always draw that out as an opportunity to share that, like, the existence of queer and trans people are as old as history itself because we're a part of human history, obviously. And it's just important to show how those elements may occur in different traditions outside what might be the typical Christian norm. So I appreciate you getting to center a lot of that. Tushar, I'll pass it over to you if you don't mind.
Thanks, Tahil, for inviting us to have this very important conversation. When I first got this invitation from you, I was thinking, it got me thinking about what faith is about for me. What does it do? I started over there, and some answers that came to my mind were faith, as I saw that worked for me and others that I know closely. It worked as a place of belonging, a place to seek guidance, a place to celebrate festivals, to make memories that again invoke joy. Yeah, thinking about them, thinking back. There's a sense of safety in these faith spaces. Um, and over the time, as I read and practiced more and more, it became more and more clearer to me the way it works for me. So, having said that, I'll start with the word discernment. Yeah, this word keeps ringing in my head when I think about faith. So, I'll give a very brief introduction of what am I doing here. My name is Tushar Bhagat. Um, Primarily, I dabble into scientific research and then slowly slipped into investigating the faith more and more through the lens of science, science of mindfulness, actually. Vipassana, there was research being done on Vipassana, a Buddhist form of meditation. And that's what got me into seeing the practical side and the purpose of faith. Yeah. So I use the word discernment because that word reminds me of asking myself the questions and then understanding why am I making certain choices that I am, yeah, in terms of faith. So um, I'll be talking about Buddhism and how that became part of my faith journey. So I grew up in like this dual religion culture in India, which is Buddhism and Hinduism. Yeah, as with some other faith traditions in India, like Jainism, Sikhism, they all run parallelly or practice both Hinduism and their particular faith. Yeah, I was also similarly raised in India with both of these. Initially, it became more about an identity and let's say permission to be part of, yeah, whether Buddhist community or Hindu community. But I felt more closer to the Buddhist community, and for a reasons that I listed earlier, feeling sense of kinship, belonging, safety, yeah, celebrations, and so on. And that became my path of exploration, like I like to call it. So initially, the Buddhism that I knew was in the Theravada tradition, more specifically Navayana in India, which is more present in, let's say, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and so on. And then just for like a brief overview of like types of Buddhisms, yeah, that are practiced in different places. And I want to bring them all together in terms of what is a practical aspect. So besides Theravada, then we have Mahayana, which is in China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and so on. And then it takes on this Zen flavor too in Vietnam. Yeah, Vietnamese Zen. And we are very familiar with, perhaps because of news and its presence in America, the Vajrayana, which is associated with the Tibetan tradition, more in Nepal, Bhutan, Mongolia, and so on. Yeah. And then you probably heard about other branches like Zen, the Japanese Zen, uh, and then Nichiren Buddhism, and then the Thailand, Thai forest tradition branch of Theravada. So before I dive a little further into my own personal experience, I want to mention a particular, what do I call it? Deity, for a lack of better word. It's a bodhisattva, let's call it an individual who has attained certain status in terms of enlightenment. Yeah. Avalokiteshvara, as mentioned in the Theravadan tradition, like more India, Nepal, and so on. And it takes on different name, Kuan Yin, in the Asian, Southeast Asian cultures. Yeah. And what is interesting about this one is uh, it is kind of gender fluid. Yeah. That's why the queer community kind of feels closer to this one. Because in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and so on, it's seen as a male figure. And in China, Vietnam, and so on, it is seen as a female figure. And if we look into Buddhism, it does not identify with a particular gender, but it's gender fluid, takes on any form. So I found that was very, very important and interesting. Yeah. Um, Aspect of Buddhism. So I mentioned the word discernment, yeah, and while discernment brings back to mind the clarity I had or developed over the time, and I like to call it faith guiding faith, yeah, the clarity that I gained over time about the faith kind of guided me about this faith, about what is this faith for me? What is it there for? Yeah, is it there just for belonging, feeling identified, feeling like recognized, acknowledged, accepted, and so on? Particularly, um, let's say the sexual orientation, gender identity, yeah, as a LGBTQIA plus member. Uh, And when I say that, what comes to my mind is spaces where I felt that sense of belonging. And the first spaces that come to my mind when I came out are the spaces here in the West, in America, particularly New York, where I went to certain affinity groups where there were dedicated Buddhist LGBTQIA plus groups, yeah, that welcomed me and others like me there, where we could integrate our faith and our gender identity um, at the same time there, yeah, and finally not having to hide either, yeah, which I found myself subconsciously doing over the years. Yeah. So the aspect of mindfulness or meditation that became like a central guiding light for me. And I'll tell you where this is coming from, as some of you probably heard these terms or phrases of what is Buddhism about. Yeah, the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, which includes development of wisdom, panya, virtue, sila. Sila meaning right effort, right action, doing all right ethical things, and then the mind training, the samadhi. Yeah, which is kind of a cycle that it feeds itself, like the samadhi or mind training feeds into the arising and development of wisdom. Yeah, so they kind of feed into each other, the virtues, wisdom, and the mindfulness or meditation training. And then we are familiar with the Four Noble Truths, that suffering exists, causes of it, it can be ended, and there is a way. And that's the way of mindfulness or meditation training or vipassana, as we may call it. So I find that it's kind of a blueprint, or as a scientist, I like to call it like a protocol, a scientific protocol about how do I go about first being part of this faith, understanding it more, understanding it myself, and keep guiding my choices from that place of understanding. Yeah. So I'll focus a little more on meditation or vipassana, mindfulness, and how that led me to understand the faith a little bit more. So, for example, certain concepts about the faith, about why am I choosing that, uh, they kind of were left behind now, yeah, because I found there are more important aspects of faith than the ones that I was originally after. For example, wanting to be in a particular temple or part of certain ceremony. Yeah, I thought that's what helps me feel like I belong. But now I no longer think that. And why? Because while meditating, yeah, the choices I make, they become more and more clear. Yeah, there is more confidence. I'm not making those choices because the masses are. I'm making those choices because they really bring me peace. Yeah. And they make me confident about the choices I make in life, be it about faith or be it about anything else. Yeah. So, speaking of mindfulness, vipassana, and meditation, yeah, I find I want to kind of connect some Buddhist concept with this. Yeah. With the meditation, vipassana, mindfulness. There's a concept called dependent origination. Yeah. Uh, in the language, ancient language of Pali, during the time of the Buddha, it used to be called Paticca Samuppada, or in Sanskrit, it is called Pratitya Samutpada. Yeah, some similar sounding, which kind of gives this whole overview of how does a human experience happen. Yeah, meaning how are we born? And they're like these 12, I briefly mentioned these words. There are these 12 uh, experiences, or let's say 12 aspects of this process of dependent origination. And this might make it clear about what dependent origination is. What does that have to do with mindfulness? So ignorance, avidya, volitional formation, sankharas, as you may have heard about, yeah, sanskaras, consciousness, vijnana, nama rupa, name and form, the six sense bases, yeah, salayatana in Pali, contact, phassa, or sparsh, you might say in Sanskrit, yeah, with various sense organs we have, yeah, feeling tone, vedana. Vedana is not the word that means pain in current language. It means feeling tone. It could be any sensation, painful or pleasurable. Craving, tanha or trishna in Sanskrit. Clinging, yeah, or upadana. Bhava, bhava meaning coming into existence, like the cycle of birth and death. That it brings us to birth, jati, not caste, but the birth, jati, aging and death, jara maranam. So the idea here is that when we have some sense experience, yeah, the upadana of the sense, it is getting in contact with us. For let's say I'll talk about me. I'm looking at a community of people gathering there. I want to be part of them. They are celebrating something. That is my visual, yeah, for my senses of vision. And then that brings a thought to my mind that I want to be part of that. And within me, I know I cannot be part of that. So there arises an anguish, yeah, and I want it even more. And there's more sadness and sadness and sadness. And then my logical thinking kind of gets affected by that. And then I make a choice of just going there, even while knowing that I am not welcome there, and then I go through more suffering. Yeah. So here, to kind of summarize that, it's kind of a reactive approach I took on because I was emotionally distressed and really longing to be there. And I made a choice that ultimately it brought even more suffering to me. So the discernment and clarity that I was mentioning earlier, that gets sharper and sharper with vipassana or mindfulness or meditation, that actually could have helped me understand what is it that is really good for me right now. Yeah, being outcast and being not included is not the thing that I need right now. I definitely need the opposite of that, inclusivity. So if I had made that distinction and discernment, I would have gone to, let's say, the affinity groups of a religious kind, yeah, of Buddhist affinity group, where I would feel welcome. So what I'm trying to do here is to see what is practically good for me so that I'm able to make well-informed choices. So that is kind of at the core of faith or Buddhism for me, the practical aspect of that. And this is what led me to explore the three aspects of faith. Yeah, the learning, practicing and sharing. When I say learning, meaning not just reading and listening, yeah, from teachers and books and so on, but learning experientially, yeah. Which brings me to practice. Practice meaning a regular meditation practice, and then sharing meaning either facilitating and teaching, which kind of feeds back into keeping me honest. if I am asking someone to walk a path, I need to walk it myself. So it kind of helps me in a way, in a good, selfish kind of way. So learning, practicing, teaching, or facilitating. Yeah. And this is what brought me to kind of sharing Buddhism in this practical kind of way through one of the organizations that I am associated with, the Bari Center for Buddhist Studies, which goes into details of the scriptures. And the sole goal of doing so is to guide the practical aspect of meditation and how it applies to our life. So I think I'll pause there uh, and see if there are any questions or comments. Yeah, maybe towards the end, but maybe hand it over to Ray. Or
Sure.
you first.
Thank you. That was pretty deep from both Aruna and Tushar. I really enjoyed you sharing the intersectionality between your faith and really culture in many ways and the LGBTQ experience. I'll keep it relatively short. Um, I grew up in the Sikh faith in the north of India, with a lot of time spent in New Delhi and Punjab and the Himalayas. And I grew up in in not a, I would say, a deeply religious family, but in a deeply culturally Sikh family. And so we had an array of examples of practice, all the way from my grandmother, who I remember sitting with a little holy book called the Gutka, little mini Guru Granth Sahib, that she would pray from every day, because there's a verbal tradition of prayer that's very important in the community, all the way to actually, I would say, everybody else. I grew up in a family that maybe today has something like 30 or 40 doctors, meaning there was a pursuit of education and science over multiple generations. And these more scientific folks veered off into more of, I would say, the cultural practice of Sikhism, going to the Sikh temples, which are called gurdwaras, living the faith in some ways, talking about it, only marrying within the faith. But there's sort of I would say, the sense I picked up about Sikhism growing up was from the culture more than the books. It was from the practitioners and family members more than the people that were in the Gurdwara, which, my family took pains to point out, were not the equivalent of priests, were not the ultimate experts in our religion, but were mere administrators and keepers of the temple. And so they were not the authority that told us how to practice our faith. There were people that, like I said, were more administrative in nature. And so the true understanding of our faith just came from our own reading of the books, from our own interpretation of the prayers. Interestingly, so I carried with me a pretty strong Sikh identity as I grew up. And actually, nobody in my family had ever been married outside the community. And so the culture was stronger than, in many ways, the religion. But it was hard to discern where one started and the other, ended. So I, sort of grew up with this pressure actually to marry a Sikh person and a Sikh boy in particular as I grew up. And that was a cultural thing. I came to study and came to college in America. 30 years ago, I graduated this year. So 34 years ago, I arrived in the US. And I started to realize that maybe love did exist. I had convinced myself growing up in my Indian Sikh community that arranged marriages were the primary way of being, and that love would come into a marriage if it started with a good friendship and partnership, and good family cohesion. And here I started to find more and more instances of romantic love than I had expected growing up. And so the place I'll start is to say that my Sikh faith convinced me to come out as lesbian. And the way that this happened was that I could sense that there was going to be a lot of aversion uh, and uh, and bias and rejection of LGBT communities. I believe that not because anybody had truly said it to me, but because I'd never seen or heard of a respected LGBT person in our community, or even around me, anywhere in the Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, Muslim people that I was surrounded by as I grew up in India. And so as I thought about how I should make the decision about whether I should be gay or I should go ahead and remain in the closet and get married, I started to think about my faith as being the highest source of wisdom. And as I thought about my faith, I didn't think about which person to go to for the answer. I started to think about the words that come in our prayer and that come from the Guru Granth Sahib, which is supposed to be now the teacher and the ultimate guru of the Sikhs, is this book. There's no person that's supposed to be the ultimate authority. It's simply the book. And the word that came to my mind as I thought about that was probably the word that is most often repeated in Sikh prayer, which is Satnam. Truth is the name, truth is the way. Sat means truth. It's also a word that comes in Hindi and in Urdu. And so I started to think about this word, and it led me to really reconsidering and thinking about what is my truth. So I didn't look for interpretation. I didn't look for somebody else to tell me what the answer was. I decided that since Satnam was reverberated and spoken, repeatedly in the faith, that must be the way. That must be what the ultimate direction of my life and my decision criteria should be. And as I thought about truth or Sat, it was very clear to me as I did my deeper reflection and, in a meditative posture, that my truth was that I was lesbian and that I was in love with this person. And I realized that if I didn't live my truth, I would actually be living against my faith in spirituality. Even if I was going to be pleasing my family and living in a way that society preferred, I realized that was going to be asynchronous and not in alignment with the fundamental spiritual posture, which resonated with me, by the way, that truth should guide the way I should be. And so, somewhat ironically, because my Sikh community and my Sikh family were completely in rejection of my decision to be LGBTQ or to live my truth, but the reality was that my decision was driven by my faith. And I understood Sikhism, like I said, as a religion or a community that came up in between this phenomenon that occurred in sort of like the 14 and 1500s, that was occurring, where there was a lot of forcible conversion of Hindus happening vis-a-vis the Mughal or Muslim emperors that at the time ruled India. And the Sikh community actually came about as a reaction or response to that. And in a way integrated the Islamic tradition with the Hindu tradition to come up with this notion of one God and no idol worship, which, by the way, I love sculptures and many of the deities that were mentioned. And so I've chosen my own path. And I found a Hindu tradition called Vedanta, which actually unifies and aligns with Sikhism by saying there is only one God, and all of the different deities are different representations or versions of that God. And so, a few things that I would share is I choose not to let the folks at the Gurdwaras tell me the way I should live life. I choose to interpret it based on the actual prayers that come from the Sikh religion. An interesting factoid I'll mention is in the Sikh religion, all names are unisex. So my name, my full name, Rayman, can be a male name or a female name. And the same is true of my mother's name and my father's name and most other names. Strove to eliminate gender identity from the naming tradition. And I viewed it, and it brought equality between the genders. It was viewed as sort of the first, in many ways, tradition that came into the Indian diaspora or Indian community, India, that made men and women equal, and women could fight in armies and be equal to men. And so sort of that difference was eliminated. And so I find it somewhat ironic that the current, sort of so-called leaders of the faith or the administrative elements of the faith choose to adopt a strict anti-LGBT posture, which I fundamentally believe is averse and in contradiction to the fundamental principles upon which Sikhism was formed. I still call myself Sikh. I feel Sikh. I live in the Seva tradition. Service to the community, service to others is one of the core tenets of Sikhism. And so I practice Sikhism not so much as a religion, but as more of a way of life. And my work with Desi Rainbow is tied into this notion of seva. I realized that people in my community and from the Desi community, South Asia, that I was surrounded by, and found the greatest sense of belonging with, look to people from similar cultures or faith traditions when they look for direction on LGBT questions and topics. And so my work to support Desi Rainbow and to do my best to ensure its continued existence are sort of tied into my Sikh faith. So I'll sort of stop there. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I feel like we're such a small group, we could just kind of veer off and get into Q&A. So Tahil, I'll give it back to you, but that's just sort of a little bit about me and how my LGBTQ identity ties in with Sikhism.
Thank you so much, Ray, Tushar, Aruna ji, for just giving us the opportunity to delve a little bit into those personal journeys and how it helps you sort of navigate those conversations accordingly. To share that I come from an interfaith background. My father is Hindu, my mother is Sikh. So growing up in both of those traditions, and having to then sort of come to my personal realization that I'm bi and that I came out, was actually very similar to your story, Ray, of, actually being propelled and affirmed by my traditions rather than seeing them as counter to my experience, because I'm a part of this creation. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is Nakach Koch Mati ke bhande Nakach Koch Kumbhare, which is there's nothing wrong with the potter, which we refer to as the divine, and nothing is wrong with the pottery. So every piece that the potter makes is made in its unique way for us to be as it is, even if it has the little cracks, even if it gets the little chips along the way. There's nothing that doesn't accept it as a part of who we are. So there's just something that I found really affirming from what you said, Ray, to you, Tushar, talking about the specific ways in how we create relationship to suffering, how we find space for vipassana to be able to, be in our personal practice of reflection and discernment, and to, give ourselves the space to see where this wisdom exists within ourselves and around us. But yeah, we have a bit of flexibility about the top of the hour, but I would love if anyone in the space had any questions or were curious about anything that the speaker said that they'd love to know more about. And yeah, let's just open up the space as we wrap up the conversation. Because I have a bunch of questions, so I'm more than happy to ask. Yeah, Eldridge, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eldridge, and I learned and left the conservative Christian faith and found my place in paganism and nature spirituality. And I was wondering if you could talk about within your traditions, what is your connection to nature? How does nature fit in along with all of the cultural and personal relationships?
I would say I haven't thought that deeply about it, but fundamentally, sort of like what Tahil said, Eldridge, what the Sikh faith says is that God is everywhere. God is omnipresent. In all humans, God is in you. You don't have to go anywhere to be with God. You don't have to face a certain direction. You don't have to do anything. And I've always understood that to encompass all the entire universe, all living beings and all non-living things. And so I've always, and this whole sort of yogic tradition of Hinduism is around alignment and integration of the human with the non-human. And so in that sense, I feel very deeply connected with nature and view God, the energy that, and I sort of try to connect spirituality with science and thinking about God as being energy or the force that created the universe and Mother Earth, this beautiful place we live in, which is so unique. And so I've always sort of integrated God into nature completely, but it hasn't been. I'm curious, Aruna, what you were about to pop in and say on that very topic, or others too.
Exactly the same, that essentially I think these are shared beliefs between all these various traditions that come out of South Asia, is that God is there, but the divine exists in everything, living, non-living. And so there is like no need to like kind of believe that they're separate, they're all unified.
Yeah, in the type of Buddhism that I understand and practice, nature is an important part of it. Yeah, I'll mention two examples. Like one is, let's say, a walking meditation that's often done in nature. Meditation retreat centers of Buddhist tradition are in nature and forest. And then to really hone in on one specific type of meditation where we contemplate on the elements that we are made of. And we particularly remember or reflect upon the shared elements between us and nature together. Yeah. And there's a fair amount of drive to protect nature, yeah, in the Buddhist tradition, as it is in most, let's say, faith backgrounds, particularly the Eastern ones. Yeah. And then the concept of oneness, yeah, that we are all one, the impermanence of us all, nature and us. We share that and many other things in nature, which includes obviously the flora and fauna, and also the inanimate elements in nature. Yeah. Anyway, that's what comes to my mind.
Thank you all so much.
I just want to add that from what Arunaji and Ray said, in Hinduism, the relationship to nature is deeply important. It is the balancing force of how we see the understandings of creation. There is what we call Purush and Prakriti, sort of our understandings of nature and nurture and how they come together. But Arunaji mentioned a specific term, right? Tritiya Prakriti, which is like the third nature in reference to those who don't follow the binary of being masculine or feminine. And that's a really interesting thing to navigate, right? It's like what we're saying is this typical binary does exist, and there is something around it and between it that has to be filled by something that is a part of nature. And there's something really powerful about that when you think about it from the Hindu context, because it does imply that, the omnipresence of the divine exists in all things, therefore nothing is outside of it. Um, and as Ray was referring to in terms of Sikhi, like the parallelisms with like the environment are so vast in Sikhi. It's very fascinating to see how so much comparison is done to like the separation of a fish from water is what a person looks like without the name of God in their life. There's always these references to how there's a need to be able to steward nature, to be able to steward existence as a personal and a collective responsibility to actually be in the process of serving God through seva or selfless service. So there's these important elements that come up that really tie different themes very seamlessly in Sikhi that I really do appreciate, and being as poetic as it is. And Reiji, of course, I know you need to step away. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. We know that obviously we're at the top of the hour now, but if there's one or two other questions that anyone would like to ask, please by all means.
I just wanted to respond to Zainab's question about what people are hoping that will be explored. I really feel that as Tahil, as you mentioned, this whole idea of the third nature and the fact that like people of the third nature have been around forever since the beginning, not just the beginning of like in religion, but obviously forever. There needs to be more exploration of who these people were, what they have contributed, because so much of the Hindu tradition has been oral tradition. Things have been like kind of transmitted through speech. And so even when you have things written down, they're attributed to multiple authors because, one name essentially could mean like people over generations wrote that one text. So I would love to kind of like for people, researchers to explore, were there like people who were of this third nature, within the LGBTQ umbrella who, and they have to be, not were they were, but who were they? And to kind of like tease out some of those refrains and stories and thoughts that can be attributed to people who were LGBTQ over history.
I'd like to touch upon this question too, with a slightly different lens. So we heard about the concept of oneness from all of us, yeah? And what that highlights is the way we relate with the world and our experiences, yeah? So coming back to the Buddhist meditations, I've been very curious about what does this faith do for me, the meditation? What does meditation do for me? Yeah, literally, what does it do to my DNA when I'm doing this type of meditation? So I've been reading about a lot of research. I'll mention a couple of them briefly. For example, the reason we age is because one of the reasons we age is because the ends of our chromosomes, like these cross structures in our DNA, X-shaped structures, their ends become shorter, shorter, and shorter. Yeah. And let's say when we do a meditation of this certain type, uh, the rate of shortening of those telomeres, ends of the chromosomes, becomes very, very slow. What does that tell us? We stay healthy longer. Yeah, this is just a physiological outcome, but then other than that, there's been research on this particular type of meditation, which improves the cognitive capacity or the clarity of the mind, changes the areas of the brain that communicate with the reactive brain, so that there's much more ease and peace. Because one of the purposes I find of faith, yeah, or belonging to a particular group or community is to feel that peace of simply being as you are. Yeah. So I was trying to connect like the science of it and then to our direct experience of how do we want our life to be peaceful and happy. So besides reading, I collaborated with some scientists in the UCAL system on this type of research and also collected my own independent data on the meditation-based my MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction program to see how does people's sleep get affected, how is their anxiety, depression, and so on. Yeah, and this is all coming out of a faith tradition, which is having a direct positive impact on a person's day-to-day life. Yeah, so that's a long answer to your short questions, and
Zainab, to also answer your question, one of the things that I'm exploring or trying to figure out in conversations with organizations like Desi Rainbow, but also just being able to be more in touch with faith-based LGBTQ organizations in general is how do different communities find sort of the theological sweet spot that helps to provide mobilization around political and social work. I'm very curious about, these ongoing conversations where oftentimes we see in diaspora communities to a lot of the political discourse, the use of theology, particularly to be able to target people. And we know that the interpretive nature of religion and scripture is such that you can really take any kind of message out of a holy book and you run with it. So my curiosity is, what does it actually mean to then create more of a structured understanding through a lens of social justice, of collective liberation, of mutual abundance, that actually says, from even the discourse that may be making us interpret this differently from thousands of years of history or hundreds of years of history, how are we actually looking at this in a way where I share mutual responsibility with with other folks that I shared this reality with? And how do I make sure that I am always affirmed in how I exist within that framework, just as much as I need to work to make sure that others are protected in their framework? So there's something about me that always makes me curious about, where could we create that kind of space to engage more of that kind of like deeper thinking or interpretation, but that's just something that comes to mind. Um, so yes, with that, if no one else has a question, I would love to just, give our thanks to Aruna ji, to Tushar, to Ray, and a special shout out to our colleague Zain Islam-Hashmi from the Aya project, who was supposed to join us on the panel today, but they unfortunately had a last minute commitment. So they weren't able to join, but we're really thankful for their willingness to be a part of the conversation. We're hoping to have them and other folks join us in the future, but uh, yeah, I know. I'm so sorry, Zainab. I know it was put out there in social media and stuff that Zain would join us, and they dropped out last minute. But we will have opportunities to engage more conversations from other leaders and community organizations. But I'd just like to thank Desi Rainbow and Arunaji for your willingness to be a part of the conversation today, and thank you to the folks that joined us. We're looking forward to having our next Empower Hour soon. We'll keep folks in touch, and thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Tahil, for inviting us, and thanks to everybody for being here.
Thank you all so
Thanks,
much.
Sahil.
Thank you, Tahil.